Welcome. I'm Jonathan Hudson, and this is Hudson Institute's Deep Dive from Jerusalem. And in today's edition, we're going to focus on the Islamic Republic of Iran negotiating with the United States on its nuclear program. To discuss that and somewhat more, let's now turn to introduce our guests, to include from left to right, from Washington, D.C., Dr. Mike Duran, who is the director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East and a senior fellow at Hudson Institute, formerly a senior director at the U.S. National Security Council on the Middle East and North Africa. Next to him is Dr. Jonathan Schechter, who formerly served as Jerusalem's foreign policy chief, currently also a senior fellow at Hudson Institute. And last but not least, from Central Israel is Colonel in Reserve Reuven Ben Shalom, who is a cross-cultural strategist and a senior fellow at the Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University. It's great to see all three of you. Dr. Duran, let's focus on Iran's nuclear program. What can you tell us about it, and to what degree is currently the state of play favorable to the United States and the West at large?
Good morning, Jonathan. Yes, the Iranians are downplaying it. They, of course, took a stand all through the Biden administration that they would not directly engage with the United States, thereby signaling that the efforts of the United States to negotiate restrictions on their nuclear program is illegitimate or are illegitimate, and B, that they just have contempt for the United States, that it doesn't have the power to compel them to do anything. Unfortunately, the United States historically has been, I think, kind of oblivious to this game the Iranians are playing. It looks like a silly little maneuvering, but it sends signals to the rest of the region about whether the United States is going to continue to allow Iran to flout its interests, to attack it with impunity, and so forth. It reminds me, Jonathan, when I worked in the White House back in 2005 to 7. This is in the Bush administration, we put out a signal, or we sent a message to the Iranians saying that we would be willing to talk to them at the level about Iraq, at the level of the ambassador in Iraq, so that the U.S. ambassador to Iraq and the Iranian ambassador to Iraq, who, by the way, was an IRGC official, would negotiate. The Iranians sat on that for months and then later announced it, but mischaracterized it and said the United States wanted negotiations at the level of Secretary of State and Foreign Minister, and they wanted to negotiate not just about Iraq, but about the whole region. In other words, they said, we're looking for a grand bargain with them, and we are capitulating. The extent to which they didn't just put out this message, they took a whole range of other steps to reinforce the message, including sending a large delegation, over 10 people, to Damascus to discuss with the Assad regime its interest in these coming negotiations between Iran and the United States. Negotiations that were never going to happen about the whole region. When we were asked by reporters, did you send a message to the Iranians about negotiating? We said, yes, but we only wanted to do it in Iraq. So in other words, we kind of confirmed all of this propaganda that the Iranians were putting out, thereby giving the feeling to all of our allies in the region that we were cutting and running and handing the region to the Iranians. I think that we need to pay more attention to this kind of symbolism. We need to dictate what the terms of the negotiations are, and we need to do so in such a way that doesn't allow the Iranians to pretend that something else is going on and that they're stronger than they actually are.
Thank you, Dr. Duran. Dr. Schechter, I'd like to ask you first about the European Union's foreign ministerial in Luxembourg, during the course of which French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot came out and stated that the European powers, particularly France, Britain, and Germany, but also Europe as a whole, needs to remain vigilant about the renewal of negotiations between the United States and Iran. What can you tell us about that, and to what degree are the Europeans serious when we're talking about this?
Well, I think it's curious that you said they said they need to remain vigilant because I haven't been under the impression that the Europeans have been vigilant for a very long time. The the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, has this mechanism, this snapback mechanism, which we've talked about here many times before, and it was supposed to be activated in the face of serious material violations of the JCPOA. And the US pulled out of the JCPOA. Iran is clearly not in compliance with the JCPOA, and the Europeans have done very little. And as we've talked about previously, the snapback mechanism itself is due to expire later this year. So if the Europeans are now saying that they're going to be vigilant, that would be a very welcome development, but it certainly wouldn't be remaining vigilant. And I think there's a question here about what the Europeans are going to do um, because of developments since 2015. And just to remind the viewers, excuse me, previously you had a series of Security Council resolutions that imposed sanctions on Iran, imposed a weapons embargo, a missile embargo, and prohibited enrichment of uranium on Iranian soil. Those were all passed in the Security Council unanimously, I would add, meaning with Russian and Chinese support in the early 2000s, probably during the same time that Mike was talking about being in the White House. And today, if the mechanism is activated, all of those resolutions come back into force, including the prohibition on any enrichment. If if the snapback mechanism expires, the opportunity to recreate any of this sort of international diplomatic pressure basically goes to zero because of developments between Iran and Russia and Iran and China in the intervening years, especially the war in Ukraine. So this is actually, if the Europeans are now going to play it tough and are actually going to be vigilant and actually hold the Iranians to account for their nuclear violations, now's the time, and it's almost the last opportunity to do so with any hope of actually doing something diplomatically.
Absolutely. Just for the sake of our viewers, the snapback mechanism, as it's called under UN Security Council Resolution 2231, is set to expire by the 18th of October, meaning there are only several months left, but the process to activate this will require a proactive approach by the Europeans as early as July. So there's not very much time left to do so. Now, Colonel Ben Shalom, I'd like to hear your take on this, but from a stick and carrot perspective, right now we are in a certain check to see the appetite, or the Americans are checking to see the appetites of the Iranians about the carrot, but nonetheless, the stick is becoming longer and longer.
This is true, and I think what we just spoke about now, the snapback mechanism, is probably the most urgent issue, because if we don't act on time, we lose that ability. By the way, interesting to point out that the Russians are the one that invented that mechanism. Now Russians that are more and more aligned with Russia. As far as the stick, or what you're referring to, the ability to strike Iran, I think what happened is throughout this war now that Israel has been waging for the last year and a half, the ability to implement such a thing, at least from the modest Israeli perspective, is much more clear. The United States put their forces forward and also made it very clear that these are forces that could be implemented. So I think it's a very real threat towards Iran. The whole issue of rhetoric is an interesting part, also by the American administration. This is maybe Trump's style, but the policy is very clear. And also from the Israeli perspective of what is being said. You saw Netanyahu sitting beside Trump as he spoke about going back to negotiations with Iran. In Israel, it was interpreted as a big surprise for Netanyahu. I'm not sure. But also, it's clear that in Israel now, the sentiment, at least of this government, is that we're very concerned from these talks. In a way, we're afraid that these talks may lead to a deal that is not a good deal. And remember that we always spoke not only about the nuclear abilities, but ballistic missiles. So it's also the nuclear bomb, and also the ability to deliver it. We are speaking more and more about the broader picture, but it's clear to me that it's going to go to a narrow picture. It's going to go to the nuclear threat itself. And the last thing maybe to remember here is that we're talking about a previous deal that was perceived as very bad by Trump and Netanyahu. The US pulled out, and now are we going back to another deal that will be something dramatically different? And this is how you can understand Israel perspective, that we're concerned that it has to be a very, very good deal or go to the kinetic option.
Absolutely. Well, as I mentioned earlier, Trump is now assessing, as he put it in his own words, whether or not the Iranians are serious. It has to do with feeling, as he put it in one of his press availabilities. And that is a big question mark, Dr. Duran, when we're hearing that remark. On the one hand, we're seeing Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, and the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, coming out just over the course of the past 24 hours stating openly that Iran's nuclear program needs to be completely eradicated. On the other hand, the seriousness of the Iranians is also something that President Trump, over the past 48 hours alone, has stressed outwardly. I'll make that decision very quickly.
The Americans are sending mixed messages, and let's talk about them a little bit here. On the one hand, officials like the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz are saying total dismantlement of the program, total dismantlement of the ballistic missile program as well. The Iranians are saying, "We'll talk to you about we'll talk to you along lines similar to the JCPOA about restrictions on stockpiles and so forth, but we will not talk about we will not talk about ballistic missiles at all, and there's no way we're going to dismantle the whole program." Donald Trump put 2 months. He put a 2-month timeline on getting an agreement back in early March, so that takes us to early May by his timeline. But at the same time, Trump is sending the message that I think with an eye to his domestic audience, that he wants peace through strength. So he wants to suggest that he's going to get a negotiated settlement because he is carrying out a muscular policy. Right on the eve of the negotiations, Steve Witkoff said, "Well, he blurred the red line, the very clear red line of dismantling the nuclear program, and says our red line is that you can't have a nuclear weapon, and we're open to negotiating this in various ways." Witkoff then kind of reinforcing we're peaceful intentions of the United States. Unfortunately, I do think that gives an opening to the Iranians. Their number one goal right now is simply to buy time, and they're experts at this. They want to buy time for all the reasons that our colleagues here discussed, starting with the snapback mechanism. As you mentioned, we have to begin the process of snapping back in July. The Iranians want to string out these negotiations until then so that they can make sure that the snapback mechanism never comes back. What they're counting on is that Donald Trump will be so busy with other things, with the border, with tariffs, with China, with Ukraine, et cetera, that he will not want to escalate against Iran. Iran always benefits from the Iranian nuclear program, always benefits from this, that it is the most important thing to the United States in the Middle East, but it is never urgent. There are always other things that are more urgent, even if they're less important, and that allows them to buy time and to continue to build their program.
Dr. Shechtel, when we're talking about the Iranians, the foreign minister of the Islamic Republic, Abbas Araghchi, is set to travel to Moscow to meet with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. Is that part of that procrastination attempt by the Iranians to somehow utilize their Russian allies in order to frustrate any American maneuver against them?
I think it's both an opportunity to play for time, as Mike correctly said. When Mike was speaking, it reminded me of I think it was past Iranian President Rouhani's book, where he bragged about how they engaged the Europeans about their nuclear program. This is going back decades, and they used the time to build a uranium processing plant in Isfahan. So I mean, it's not a secret strategy. It's the declared strategy, playing for time to make progress on the program. So I think the talks with Russia, on the one hand, serve that interest, and on the other hand, there's very clear coordination going on right now between Iran and its allies in Russia and in China. And I think we may have spoken about this previously. In October of 23 is when the missile embargo expired under the terms of the JCPOA. And within a day of that embargo expiring, the Russian Foreign Ministry put out a statement saying that we are now free to engage in basically in missile trade and with Iran. And of course, we know that that's been the case. So I think it's both playing for time, but it's also reflecting a genuine confluence of interest between Russia and Iran that it has only gotten stronger.
Under UN Security Council Resolution 2231, they articulated which was actually the resolution that also enforced the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, also known as the 2015 Nuclear Agreement, that never was signed, actually. So 2231, the resolution, was the only trigger to enforce that under the guise of international law. It's highlighted that it calls upon Iran not to engage in ballistic missile technology or other type of technologies that can further develop and carry nuclear payloads, something that was quite interesting at the time, since the Iranians immediately thereafter outwardly rejected that and said they would never agree to such terms. They already have missiles to target Europe. They already have missiles to target Israel, all of its regional adversaries. What it's working on right now with its satellite program and various technologies that it is vigorously pursuing is for intercontinental ballistic missiles, in order to be able to deter the United States of America and the homeland. So it has broader implications from that perspective, something that the United States needs to take into account. Colonel Ben Shalom?
Absolutely. This is another example of something that Israel for many years addresses and says this isn't only our problem. Unfortunately, many times around the world, it was easier to see things as a local Israeli problem. Especially with Iran, we kept saying this is a regional issue. This has world ramifications, and you just pointed to some of them. As far as the technology that Iran possesses, they demonstrated it throughout this war that they can fire hundreds of ballistic missiles, accurate missiles, by the way. This is not something to brush aside. On the other hand, we already demonstrated that we can shoot most of them out of the sky, and the damage to Israel was minimal. On the other hand, we demonstrated our ability to reach anywhere in Iran and attack that. I just want to point out that as far as the JCPOA, two things. One is that the address of the Security Council in that resolution did discuss nuclear or ballistic missiles, but it never went to that realm. Nobody ever perceived that as relevant. So Iran was in a way free to continue, and they continued to develop and to employ and deploy these missiles. The whole issue was the nuclear weapons, and that itself was perceived by many to be very weak. Another point I wanted to point out about the Russians, I said before that they're the ones that invented the snapback mechanism. So I think, and I'm not an expert to the details of the snapback mechanism, but I think that even though they're engaging now and we see the collaboration between them with drone technology, etc., Russia does not have a veto power now, so they can't stop the snapback mechanism. Interesting that they invented a mechanism where they do not have the ability to veto it, so the snapback mechanisms can be turned on by the other members. My colleagues can correct me if I have that wrong.
No, you don't have that wrong. It's exactly right. But one point that I think that we should expand on, and that is in light of not having enough time to discuss all of the Middle Eastern intricacies, Dr. Duran, the belligerence of Iranian proxies is not part of the negotiations, as the Iranians have put outright. And we're still seeing the belligerence by Ansar Allah, which is dominated by the Houthi tribe in Yemen against freedom of navigation just yesterday on Sunday. We had another ballistic missile launched towards Israeli territory. Thankfully, it was intercepted outside of Israeli airspace, but nonetheless, debris did fall in the vicinity of the town of Hebron, and we're seeing additional activities, be it in the Gaza Strip, be it in Lebanon and elsewhere, where the Iranians are still very much involved.
Yeah, this is one of the things that the Iranians are very good at doing, or at least we allow them to be good at this, and that is to narrow down the negotiations to very, very small issues like the question of uranium stockpiles, and we spend days and days, hours, weeks, I mean, hours and hours, days, weeks, months talking about stockpiles, and then not talking about the larger question of the Iranian proxies, the ballistic missiles, and so forth. What Donald Trump should do here is make it clear to the Iranians that they will not dictate the agenda of the negotiations. What the Iranians are doing right now is negotiating the agenda with us. And so far, I think we have to say that they are winning that contest.
I hope that's not the case, but unfortunately, I know you're usually right on that, so I'll just concede. Dr. Schechter, how can Israel react to that?
I think Israel has to continue to maintain its funny at a time of such great uncertainty around what's happening in Israel and Israeli policy. I think one Israeli policy has been consistently enunciated for over a decade, which is that Israel will not allow Iran to get nuclear weapons, and I think that's been the correct policy, and I expect that will continue to be the policy. And I think that Israel's obviously following the negotiations closely. I thought it was important to read that that the American negotiating team updated their Israeli colleagues immediately after the round concluded this weekend, which is obviously very different from the negotiations that took place in Oman in 2013, which were done behind Israel's back. But I'm sure that there's great trepidation in Jerusalem about what is or isn't included and what the terms will or won't be and how much time this is going to take, because I think everybody has their eye on the snapback expiration, because really the implication of the snapback expiration is that the ability to apply diplomatic pressure on Iran will drop precipitously in October, or actually, as you mentioned correctly, a little bit before that, because it takes some time for the snapback mechanism to actually be implemented. And at that point, you're really left with either a nuclear-armed Iran, military action to prevent that, or both.
Colonel Ben Shalom, on the military angle, U.S. Central Command is taking the lead on preparing contingencies alongside other operational headquarters in the United States in collaboration with different divisions. Of course, on that, the IDF is fully integrated into CENTCOM and is being very proactive in assisting the United States in this matter. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I'm happy that you use that strong terminology, so I don't have to. Fully integrated is a very good term for that. Really fully aligned interoperability, as we say. And we've been working on this for decades. So you could see for decades preparing actually for this moment, for the ability to turn on such an operation. You can also hear, interesting, by the way, that you can hear the rhetoric by the Americans not hiding it, saying very clearly. Some I even heard this week talking about having Israel in the lead. So I don't think so. I think Israel will never have the lead, or I hope we don't have the lead, even though we should remember that if these negotiations now go in a track that Israel perceives to be leading nowhere, or that it's going to be too late, Israel could act alone. So if it's acting alone, and I hope we don't reach that, and if it's acting with the US, you won't see any daylight as far as the way we perceive it and what we decide to do and how we implement it. And I think even the exercises that once in a while CENTCOM and the IDF carry out together and then post it on Facebook, I think this also demonstrates what we're doing and what we're trying to demonstrate as far as strategic messaging.
Dr. Duran, in 1 minute, is there concern in Washington that Jerusalem may act alone?
Not at this point. I mean, I think everyone knows the Israeli capabilities. The issue here from the Israeli point of view is it's very difficult to act on this issue alone. The Iranians will respond with, we know from past experience, they will respond with a massive ballistic missile barrage against Israel. In order just to defend against that, the Israelis need the Americans. They need American equipment. They need all of the help that comes from CENTCOM's network, which includes sensors and interceptors in other countries around Israel. But also the Iranians have made it clear. They have directly threatened the Saudis and the Emiratis and told them that if there's an attack on Iran's nuclear program, the Emiratis and the Saudis will be in their crosshairs. One ballistic missile from Iran could destroy the economy of the United Arab Emirates. I mean, if it hit the Burj Al Khalifa or something like that. In order to prevent the Iranians from widening the front in that way, the Israelis need the Americans. Again, the Israelis cannot deter the Iranians from striking the Saudis or the Emiratis. Only the Americans can. So unfortunately, from an Israeli point of view, there's really no way to think about an Israeli attack on Iran that doesn't somehow pull in the Americans. So that makes this a negotiation with the Americans about how to deal with this problem, whether the Israelis want to negotiate or not. And they really can't bluff their way through this. The Iranians understand this. The Iranian strategy is built on this fact.
I will point out, and I completely agree with you, but I will point out that the messaging that the Iranians put out, the threats, were also relayed to both Iraq and Turkey. So those are two additional countries. Turkey proper is a NATO country, which raises questions about Article 5, of course, in the event that something like this could happen.
Jonathan, can I make one more sentence here on this? Because I
Very
was a little
briefly.
bit too pessimistic in what I said. Let's not forget that the Israelis also in situations like this can get very creative. So there was a similar kind of standoff between Hezbollah and Israel, and how did Israel, with the Americans restraining with the Israelis, and how did they respond to it? Well, there was the pager attack. There was the decapitation of Hezbollah and so on. So the Israelis can get creative and interesting as well if things don't go the way they want it to.
Thank you, Dr. Duran. I'd like to also immediately thank Dr. Schechter and Colonel Reuven Ben Shalom for all of your valuable insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. This has been Hudson Institute's Deep Dive from Jerusalem and Washington. Until our next edition, have a good week.